Hey, friends, welcome back to season 6 of Shop Talk.
This is where we talk about all things related to health and well-being for people who live and work cross-culturally.
Glad you're here. Friends, welcome back to Shop Talk. Thanks for joining us. James, who are we talking to today?
Hey, I'm excited to have my friend Lisa Green on. She's a professional counselor with an MA in clinical psychology from Wheaton and over 15 years experience providing counseling to children, adolescents, and adults in a variety of settings. She joined Olive Tree Counseling Center as a counselor in 2016 and in 2020 transitioned to the role of executive director. Though she still does provide some counseling, which she loves, her primary role is to oversee the staff of the counseling center, which included moving the organization from its birthplace in Antalya, Turkey, to Budapest, Hungary in 2024. Lisa is a TCK, a Navy kid, turned TCA, third culture adult, having lived now the past 10 plus years outside of her home country, and recognizes that makes her relatable to some people and weird to others. Not us, very relatable. Moving around the world gave her a great love for exploring new places and trying new things, but also preferring the best everyday things like a great cup of coffee or a loaf of bread. She loves city life, but is also trying to turn her apartment into a garden. So great to have you here, Lisa.
Thanks. Great to be here.
I've been noticing, particularly in the last 6 months to a year, and I assume, Lisa, you as well at the Olive Tree, is a kind of an increase in our cross-cultural workers who, for one reason or the other, have had to leave, sometimes quite suddenly, from their places of life, of work, of home, of connection. And a lot of people are asking me about that, both leaders and organizations. Hey, how do we do this well? What does care look like? So I thought it'd be great to just come together, and you've experienced it both as a individually, personally, as the Olive Tree had to move, but also in all the care. So I wonder if you also noticed kind of an increase in the number of people in the last 6 months to a year.
Yeah. And I would even track back a little further than that, noticing it's year to 2 years, probably kind of in the
Mm.
same timeline that we experienced it for Olive Tree. When we reopened our doors here in Budapest, it was a year ago in March. And out of the first, I don't know, 30 inquiries we had, something like 25% of those were people who were being displaced.
Mm.
Like they were seeking care because they were being displaced. And it was really striking to us, especially having just gone through that ourselves, how many people were kind of in the same shoes that we had been in. The world is getting more unstable, it feels like. I don't want to be a fear monger, but it's just the reality it seems like we're living in, especially when it comes to visa opportunities for people in different places.
And I mean, it's not fear mongering. It's just you look on the news and you see like there's so much upheaval and so much conflict in the world, and it affects the ripple effects spread far and wide. So
I was doing a little reading on complexity theory, which is a totally different topic. But one of the things some people have been talking about is right now, the world we live in is brittle, anxious, nonlinear, and incomprehensible. So there's systems that used to be really strong, but are suddenly failing under stress, brittle, anxious in terms of, I think, just cognitively overloaded with all the information that we have. Non-linear, so one little thing happens in one part of the world, like shipping lines close, and then suddenly the entire world loses access to something. And then incomprehensible in the fact that it's just really not predictable, the volume and speed of information. And I think that's part of it.
Yeah, how people are making decisions, how those impact the decisions we have to make. That's a good. I'll put that on my list to read more about. It sounds very relatable.
It's a deep dive. Beware.
Uh,
I wonder if either of you know the percentage of cross-cultural workers that will have to face an evacuation or a sudden departure during their time as working overseas.
37.
Did you make that up?
I did just make that up.
Good
Yeah.
on James.
Okay.
It sounded good enough to me. I
There
have
you
no
go.
idea, but I was ready to go with it.
What are just some of the types of reasons you've seen people have to leave suddenly?
Yeah, the things you would expect, certainly, and certainly we've seen it happen just over the past couple of years, war starting unexpectedly or kind of in an area that tends to see war or civil unrest. People have to evacuate for their safety in those cases. Sometimes it's a government visa decision. We see that more. It's certainly that was the case in Olive Tree's case. A sudden security threat of a different sort. There's all kinds of layers to that. Sometimes a medical or a family emergency. It's not countrywide or team wide. It's specific to a family or an individual in that sense. There's lots of complexity and layers in organization. Sometimes an organization makes that call for a variety of those reasons. Some of those I've just listed, and some of them otherwise. But I think the interesting thing to me is that almost regardless of why you have to have a sudden departure or an expulsion from a country, there's layers to the complexity of the psychological impact, but it has some similar psychological impact reasons. It's not just, if you're evacuated because war starts, it has this kind of impact on somebody. But if you're evacuated because of a family emergency, it has a very different impact. Really, the trickle down effects are often the same for people in a lot of ways. And so it relates kind of regardless of what reason you're being evacuated for.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that people face, like the psychological impacts that people face? I'm wondering too, I know that some evacuations are a bit slower, like slower, air quotes, but like,
Mhm.
it's not
Mhm.
so sudden. It might be like a week to several weeks where something's happening, whereas some happen
Mhm.
pretty immediately. And so I just wonder, yeah, what the impacts are as people begin
Mhm.
processing it and just going through the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it can be over a pretty long period of time, really. I think the thing that tends to impact people the most, we'll put it as the headline, is just this loss of control, loss of agency. Most of us get to decide where we live and how we live and kind of a lot about our day to day. And when that's taken away from us, it really disrupts our sense of agency, our sense of control. It undermines this. I think it's an illusion that we have control over a lot more things than we really do, but we really like to have it, and so it takes away that sense. And then it's a critical life disruption. It takes away all of our routines, our sense of role, our role, our place in the world. It takes away what we do every day, what bed we're waking up of in the morning, just kind of every layer of life it impacts us. And I think that loss of control really is sometimes the most impactful for a lot of people, depending on how much time they have to plan for it. Obviously, that can help mitigate some of that, how much agency they have and how much and where they go from there and what they do from there. It helps to mitigate some of those things, but universally, that's a pretty shared experience for people that are departing the place they live.
It kind of shakes that core of sense of safety. So sometimes people can't control their
Mhm.
reaction because their body's just like, I'm not safe. So we see people that tend to be
Mhm.
have really strong reactions, sometimes anger to anyone who's available. And sometimes organizations are stepping in saying, we've got to get all of our people out because actually we're the ones responsible for their safety.
Mhm.
And other organizations might choose to stay, and people have to leave local friends behind. So sometimes there's really strong reactions towards the organization or towards the government, and it's this great sense of injustice and a physiological sense of not being safe that, is really impactful. And I think often people will tend to go to their home countries wherever they're from. So sometimes their friends and family are like, "You're so much better now. Aren't you glad that you're safe?" And actually, they're really sad to have had to lose their home and say goodbye to all their plants that are now going to die and their cat, they don't know where it went. And
Yeah, yeah, there's so many layers after this. And I think, I think you're exactly right. So there's this kind of sense of what we lose before there's there's the uncertainty, right? So when something like a situation is ramping up, sometimes it happens and overnight you're gone. But sometimes there's this ramp up period. So there's this uncertainty and this kind of decision making period that has to happen. And that is really stressful. And sometimes I think it's harder to tolerate for people than the actual danger. So say,
sure.
an army is moving into your town and that there's danger, but the uncertainty of how are we going to make this decision, who's going to make it, when does it happen, that's a really hard thing for people to tolerate. It's, again, removes that sense of control, but the sense of safety that's lost is really pervasive too. So whether it's like a physical safety, I might be dangerous, it might be dangerous for me to be in the streets, or it's this sense of just like control, safety, I know what my life should be like or will be like. That's a really big thing too.
I've had experience of it a little bit from both perspectives. My husband was in leadership in our area, and while he was not so directly involved in some of evacuation decisions, he was adjacently involved in, hearing from the leadership perspective of sometimes people need to evacuate, but they've been in the situation so long, so they sometimes don't see the danger themselves. If it is like a one of those situations where there's conflict or something like that, and then the people who are on the ground saying, no, but I want to make this decision myself. I don't want you to come in and make it for me, even though it could be the best decision. So it can be
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, that's really true. And I'll tell you what, I lived in Turkey for 8 years and entered Turkey during kind of a tumultuous time. There was a lot of terrorist attacks and things happening, a coup attempt in the country. And I remember now looking back on it, thinking, not that I should have been evacuated in any sense, but wow, I really learned to tolerate a lot of stuff that now looking back on it, it's kind of remarkable that it didn't feel more disruptive to me. And I think that's true that it's the frog in hot water sort of thing. You just get used to a lot. And when you're so invested, when you're really invested in being in the place that you've usually spent years being invested in relationships and language and culture and ministry, most people really want to stay. And so the leaving part versus the event that makes them leave is the hardest part of it. That's the thing that really that's the most disruptive over time. So the event of being evacuated is hard, but the loss
Mm.
of place, the loss of stability, the loss of ministry, the loss of friendships and relationships is really the thing that usually people take the most time to recover from and have the hardest time with after this sort of event, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sometimes there's more frustration at the organizational involvement than it is even in the local situation that was leading to it, whether it's a visa access or war or any sense of unsafety. I think there's just more of an understanding of like I kind of was ready for that to not be safe, but I expected my organization to listen to me more. Or I think there's
Yeah,
this tension of often I've done a debriefing with people who we're talking gunfire all around them, and they're like, I can't believe they made us leave. So
exactly. Right. Yeah. So
hopefully
who
it's
gets to who
collaborative,
gets to
but
make the decision? Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. That's a really hard part. Yeah.
I got an idea, Brady. I wonder if we talk just a little bit in terms of like the crisis angle. So a little bit about pre-crisis factors, like what is it that it's helpful to think about and be prepared for? And then a little bit like as it's happening, how can organizations be aware, but even individuals as they're making difficult decisions? And then what does care look like after an unexpected departure? I worked with somebody who was living in a really high risk place, and there was about a week and a half of indication they were probably going to have to leave, and then a 24-hour, hey, get your bag ready, we're going in the morning. And in the debriefing, one of the ladies said, I just never thought it would actually happen. I never thought we would have to leave, which is, in my mind, astonishing based on where they were living and everything that had happened in the lead
Yeah.
up to.
Yeah. Yeah. But honestly, so relatable to me
Yeah.
personally because, we spent 6+ months preparing for the eventuality that Dollar
Mm.
Tree would have to move. We did scoping trips and vision trips. I spent a lot of time and energy preparing for the eventuality that I and the organization would need to move. But when I got the text saying that my visa was denied, after I was literally typing the sentence, we don't know what will happen. Anything could happen. Acknowledging that with my brain. But when I got, the moment later, my text saying your visa application has been denied, I was shocked. I was
Mm.
just shocked. And it was, it's just the emotional reaction that you can't
Yeah.
predict to the reality of what's happening to you. But having prepared for it in the way that we were able to do, and in these other circumstances, you can't always prepare in the same way. But I think having good contingency planning, having that bag packed when you're in a situation like that, knowing kind of having your list of if we need to evacuate suddenly from anywhere, from any country, whether it feels unstable or more safe, kind of knowing if I have to pack a bag in 24 hours, here are the things that I'm going to prioritize. Actually, really, really helpful in the end. Helpful to have some level of preparation, even if you can't prepare on the emotional level in all the ways you think you might be able to.
Right.
I wonder too, and I know like you can't plan for every eventuality, but for the situations that tend to be just baseline more volatile, if there can be just regular discussions with leadership or whoever, even if it hasn't ramped up, just having the regular discussions of just reminders of like this is where the points are where we're gonna start wondering if you need to leave, and just like
Mhm.
helping them to maybe keep it in the forefront of their minds too, because like y'all have said, sometimes when you're on the ground you don't see what people from a whatever, what is it, 5 miles up,
40,000 feet. I don't know. That's what I hear
40,000
people
feet,
talking about.
yes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, however high an airplane actually flies or whatever.
Replies, yes. And so
Yeah.
I wonder if
Yeah.
those sort of regular discussions could help give the people on the ground more of a sense of agency.
Yeah, well, and I think helps kind of craft expectations too about where like from an organizational perspective, where they have input, where what they're paying attention to. And I think for people that tend to be more anxious or need to have information or want to be paying a lot of attention, maybe less of the Lone Rangers, but the people who tend more towards anxiety, it's comforting. It's comforting to know that somebody else is looking out for them, has the information, is taking into account what's happening,
Mm.
that they're not the only ones making that decision. But I think even for the people who really want to only, want to stay no matter what and make that decision themselves, it still helps to kind of foster the expectation that maybe that won't be the way it goes, and maybe that's okay. And maybe there's these level, we in our contingency planning in Turkey, we use like, the yellow, orange, red sort of, and here's what that looks like. And so we all know what it means we're in the orange zone, and here's what you need to do to be prepared. And it just helps everybody kind of shift into that mental and emotional space a little bit more.
Yeah, I think the more this stuff is written down ahead of time, who's responsible, who has the final say, it's exactly what Lisa's talking about. It's about those expectations, but just really knowing, even some awareness of, oh yeah, I'm not going to always have the best perspective when I'm in the middle of it. That's why we listen. A lot of times, one of the trigger points is listening to local colleagues. So we have these trigger points, but often I find people keep wanting to move them out. So you make these really good points, like if this and this and this
Mhm.
happen, we're definitely leaving. And then they're like, when it happens, they're like, well, it doesn't feel that bad. So those bombs are only so close. Let's move it to this thing, and we that tends to happen, and then it can be too late. Whereas I think being able to get out successfully is always a win. Families can self-evacuate, so if you don't feel safe, like you can leave. If
Yeah.
feel free to do that, to have agency when you can. And then I think to trust your organization, to be mindful of some of these things, know the process. That all helps that kind of pre-crisis factor. And
Mhm.
it's always hard. I was meeting with a leader recently, and I'm like, these situations are just always tough. It's a lot of loss. It's a lot of, uncertainty. Where will we go? Where
Yeah.
will we stay? Do we all go out together? We'll talk about that. Do we go somewhere separate? When will we see each other again? Where will I live? I don't have a house, a car. Do I stay with my parents? How much fun is that? All of those
Mhm.
things that it's just hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And so much of the kind of the middle of when this happens,
Mm,
after a decision is made, so much of it is just about practicalities. I mean, you
right.
are a lot of time, we'll get requests at Tree sometimes from well-meaning organizations who are like, person is evacuating from this field. Do you have a spot for them next week? They want them to come straight into like care, which is lovely. It's a lovely sentiment. But really, that's not the thing that those people need at that stage. They need just the practical life stuff of like a safe place to be and a place to take some deep breaths, and to, they need to know that if their finances are trouble, they have support in that. They need to know that somebody will help them cook meals if they need to. Somebody's going to meet them at the airport that knows the city they're moving to. If they're not going home, so to speak, wherever that might be. There's just like the practicalities of life need to be sorted before somebody has any space to do emotional processing about what's
Mm.
happening, even if they're emotional about it, right? That's not the stage we're at in the kind of during or right after.
It might be for weeks.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
wondering how long it usually takes before people are able to start processing.
Oh, I don't know that I have a good usual. I really think it depends on the person, and really because it takes a sense of safety to some
Mm,
degree in order to be able to do that. So it really depends on what that looks like for a person. And probably realistically, even like amongst a family,
mhm.
people will maybe fall at that stage at different times. Maybe a good rule of thumb, I'm curious about what you both think about this, but at least probably a month afterwards to say like let life settle a little bit, if nothing else, because then you kind of have recognize the implications of what's happened and where you're at, and have some sense of routine or agency restored to be able to then dig into what just happened to me and what am I going to do about it now.
Yeah, I definitely lean toward that weeks to month. Doesn't mean they're not getting care before that, but in terms of like a
Right.
processing time, I think
Yeah.
for organizations that think about some of that practical stuff, like where do you go is often the first question. And sometimes it's just wherever that flight gets to. But I have an organization that flown people in to just run an Airbnb basically. So the people come in, organizing food, doing some of the logistics. That's a great way of caring that's not about, a debriefing or processing stuff. Being mindful of like what some of those things are, having a place like SIL in the past used to have an agreement with a place in Germany to kind of have rooms available at a last minute's notice, like always having an emergency spot to go to. Do you have any thoughts on like if it's more than one person that are suddenly having to leave? Do they go together? Do they go apart? Like, what are your thoughts on some of those things?
Yeah. I I'm a real depender in that my answers are like, it depends. I think if it's a if it's kind of a close-knit team or a close-knit
Mhm.
group of people who already really rely on each other for emotional support and know how to do that well and have a good bond, that's probably a good idea. It's not a maybe not for a long term, like now we need to stay together forever, but in the short term, for instance, yeah, when Olive Tree, our team was planning on contingency planning long before the visa stuff came up, and it was just kind of broadly, they said, okay, if we need to leave, evacuate, we'll go move to a place together and spend at least a week there together, and then decisions can be made. And so I think that's a good idea. If it's a group of people that are a little less emotionally connected and might have real diverse needs when it comes to like families or family sizes or maybe singles versus families and just their needs, it's impractical to meet all in one place or together, then I certainly would be more flexible with what that looks like. But but it is, especially if we're talking a team of people who are connected in some significant way, having a chance for them to come back together, whether it's right away or not, is a really good thing for their processing.
Do you think, like, when they get to the point where they're able to start processing, is it helpful to have the team like process together if they can? And like, I'm sure there's like individual processing too, but it's like, what are the benefits of that, of trying to bring the team together for that?
Yeah. Yeah, again, I maybe kind of with the same criteria. Sometimes that's really helpful. Sometimes sometimes it's not. Sometimes people have very vastly different experiences and that will be more disruptive to their to what they need than others. One of the things that I think is interesting. So before I came to the field, one of the things that I was asked to do is train to do critical incident stress debriefing, CISD, which was 15 years ago. It was like they had to, in the training, they had to defend themselves of like, well, I know people don't think that we're the best option, but here's why we're still the best option. But it turns out really in the literature, we understand now today, it's not really the best option. So this like forced group debriefing, forced group training of like, let's process the emotional impact on everybody with this kind of this model is not the best practice. Psychological first aid, where you just kind of understand that people have a variety of needs. They need safety, they need support, they need connection, they need to be able to reduce distress and connect people to whoever will be a good support system for them. They need to be able to strengthen whatever coping skills they do have is really better practice. It's best practice. And that can happen with a group, but it doesn't have to, certainly.
I think when the CISM CISD came out, it was the first thing of its kind to say, "Oh, hey, we should do care after a crisis," which is great, but it was so oriented around like it has to be within 72 hours. You have to have this exact same process, no matter what the group was and what their experience was. And I just heard within the last couple of weeks, there's some document somewhere in our organization that's like 72 hours, which we know is actually not, you shouldn't have it shouldn't be time-based at all because everybody's so different in their experiences and needs and how safe they
Right.
feel. Do they have agency again? And I think organizations are struggle sometimes to balance that. We want to care and provide them with the resources at the same time. People really need some agency in their life because that just got taken away from them. So navigating that's just it's challenging, I think, for an organization too.
Yeah. Well, and the best thing to help that is to communicate with the people that are involved, to ask them kind of
Right,
what they want and need, and that helps restore that agency. But the
right,
challenge of that is we can really acknowledge too that people don't always know what they need at the time, and having to make more decisions about, do you want to do it now or later at this time, or where do
right,
you want to go and how do you want it to look? And oh, that's not easy to do too when you're in the chaos of things. So having regular check-ins, I mean, if we're
right.
talking organizational support or maybe just kind of broadly support system, if somebody's in the midst of this, checking in regularly just to kind of get a sense of how they're functioning, and what it might be a good time for, or what are their actual practical needs. And, are they kind of thinking ahead at this stage? Or are they still very much in the moment of I need to cook dinner for my family. What in the world am I going to cook in this new, like kind of helps you get a better sense of where somebody is in those stages and what they might be ready for.
I can think of times where there's somebody might be getting help, but that person may not have any way of feeding back into the organization. So, like if I'm meeting with somebody as a counselor and then they happen to come across a crisis, sometimes I'm already meeting with them ongoing, or sometimes it was connected to that. Because of confidentiality, I'm not communicating with the organization. So, part of my role is to help that individual have the right words and to know what to say and who to reach out to. So, it's also good if the organization is like, oh, yeah, we need to make sure that somebody is checking in regularly from outside the context, how each person on this team or is doing as potentially the temperature is rising, leading to a possible emergency departure.
Someone's going to interact with some people who've been evacuated, like, they're meeting them off the plane. Everything's pretty fresh and raw with these people. What are some helpful ways that
Mm.
the teammates or leadership, whoever, can interact and just support people?
Yeah, I mean, I think we come right back to that really practical stuff of just have things ready and available to them. It doesn't have to be I think about myself as a host sometimes, and I want to give people good options of like, would you rather have this for dinner or this for dinner? Would you rather do this or that? And especially right at first, just having things kind of ready and available, but making it clear, like, if you have needs, we really want to hear about it. Please communicate that to us. If you're aware of things, we want to hear, we want to know, but here's what we've set up for you in advance so that you don't have to do some of that decision making. You don't have to do the thinking about just the utter practicalities of life. Having regular connection, it's not, we've already said this really, but having somebody just kind of dropped off in a place where they don't have connection, especially face to face, some sort of just
Mm.
human contact is not ideal. So some regular connection points that some of that can feel normal too, like so much of what somebody experiences in the midst of this big transition is that everything has changed, everything has been disrupted, and there needs to be some sense of normalcy, some sense of I can do this same thing every day, and I could still make my coffee the way I like it. So how am I going to do that? Or I can still take a walk like I do to for stress release, or um, I can have a normal conversation with somebody that has nothing to do with how disrupted my life is. I remember at a stage of my transition, my sudden departure, people were great with checking in with me, and it was really nice. But I remember having to say a few times, I don't want to talk about it today. Can we talk about something else?
Anything else?
Because I don't want to just sit. I don't feel like I'm emotionally exhausted, essentially, is what I was doing. I was exhausted, and talking about it more was not what would help restore me in any way. So let's talk about something else. Tell me about what you're doing, like that
Yeah.
sort of thing, that sense of normalcy, restoring that is big. It's huge.
We talk about Ted Lasso or just like anything that's not
Yes,
related to this.
exactly.
I think too, like if someone say like is being evacuated from like the Middle East and they end up
Mhm.
maybe in Istanbul for a few days, well, that's a whole other ball of wax there.
Yeah.
And so another whole culture shock. I'm like, oh, what do we do here? So having
Mhm.
someone who can help them figure out routine and
Hmm.
stability, I imagine, is really helpful.
Yeah. And I mean, if there's space for it, there's so many ifs here, but if there's space for it, if there's maybe somebody from the organization, or maybe somebody's evacuated to a place where there's other leadership or teammates or something, kind of inviting them along with you to say, like, here's what I'm doing today in the ways, I'm going to the grocery store and I need to, take transportation here. If you want to come along with me, I'm happy to have you do that with me. So it's not just about them. It's kind of inviting them into your routine, your space in a way that's kind of co-regulation-esque. You know what I mean?
When I was in Kenya, we had some families that were in countries around in higher risk situations, and they would take vacations to Nairobi because they said, if we ever have to leave medical
Mm.
emergency evacuation, this is where we'll come. So they stayed at the same guest house. They made some friends with other families who were there. Their kids knew some of the places, they knew the parks, they knew some of the places. And sure enough, there was a time came when they did have to leave suddenly and unexpectedly. But having already established that routine and rhythm, the family was so much more stable because they were in a place that they knew. They already knew where the grocery stores were, and they had for years been coming back to that same kind of place, being like, "We know we live in a high risk place, so if it ever happens, this is where we'll go." And I saw that really making a big difference for the kids to just be like, oh, well, this is just Tuesday for us. Because they missed
Mm,
out on a lot of the other context that the parents knew about increasing
Yeah,
danger, and for them, they're back to a place that they already knew.
I
Lisa,
think
any
that's really
thoughts
clever.
about what it's like for singles versus marrieds versus families?
Yeah, yeah, I do. I mean, I think the standard is that, you know, families obviously are doing this together. So you kind of have some built-in support system
Mhm.
or some built-in, you're not doing this alone. For singles, like so much of cross-cultural life, that's not it's not a guarantee. You might be evacuating with people or leaving with people, but you're not necessarily, for instance, when I came to Hungary, I moved by myself. And that was a big, like the transition and where my support could or would or needed to come from was a big thing to grapple with and figure out. So I would say for organizational care and kind of support system care, recognizing that singles might need more check-ins,
Hmm.
more of that kind of ease, and especially people they already have a relationship with. Ideally, it's not this kind of brand new like help me help, I'm going to help you through this, but I'm just getting to know you too. So some established relationships and established carers and going to a place. This is when it becomes maybe even more important for that person to go to a place where they do know somebody or have some context or have some sense of like, I'm not all on my own in the world here. It's just a greater need for support and care in that sense. Not to say that families and couples don't need that, obviously, but there is some built-in support system there that singles may not have.
So true.
I was also thinking about you referenced this earlier, James, I think, with the idea that a lot of people evacuate to their home countries and they go back to maybe families that they're living in their parents' basement or, church provided housing or something.
Yeah.
There's so many, that feels, I think, for a lot of people like the most stable, the most familiar, the most known option. But boy, does that bring with it a whole other host of complications, stressors. And I mean, anybody who's ever been in a home assignment implicitly understands exactly some of those complications and stressors. But add into it what I think you said earlier, which is this sense that I think a lot of times people at home that don't necessarily really get it will have this sense of, oh, you're home. We're glad you're home. You're safe now. It's over. Especially if, but none of it feels over for people that are leaving. So once again, the people that do get it, organization support and other sort of support systems that really understand it, the circumstances are even more important than just being in this familiar place.
I
I,
wonder if we could talk about how leadership can support people as they're processing and as they, the weeks might turn into months and people are still dealing with the grief and the questions and things like that. How can the leadership in the organization support the people going through this?
Yeah, I think recognizing that it is a long-term process is a good place to start. It's not just about getting somebody to safety and even, we're doing relatively good, so okay, you're good, but scheduling check-ins that are really intentional around connection and figuring out how you're doing and kind of assessing needs, whether it's probably quite frequently in the beginning, but then after they're stable, another month and out and 3 months out and 6 months out. Even if people, appear to be in that kind of stable zone, having those regular connection points still are important. Having part of that be a needs assessment so that the global worker knows and understands that they are not the only one paying attention to what they need, that the organizational personnel is still paying attention and advocating for what they might need as well. I would think that this around this time is a great time to say, what are we thinking about with debriefing or counseling or kind of depending on what those needs are, where you end up in the world. Let's do some structured care and processing around what's happened. Um, it's not a necessity. It's not like everybody will end up with trauma, quote unquote, either the way we use it today to cover everything that's hard for us or actual traumatic responses, PTSD or something. Um, but it's still a healthy, helpful practice to do that processing. The ambiguous loss
Hmm.
is the thing that takes the time to process and understand. So it's not just about, this thing happened, it's over, we've done our check-ins, you've done your processing. So and now maybe, say you've lost your ability to return to that place. So you found a new ministry placement and that's where you're going. And aren't you excited about that? And maybe, hopefully to some degree, but the ongoing ambiguous loss, the grief, it lasts for a long time. It's a lot to process. And even after stabilization, you talk about transition cycles and some of the terminology there, this like chaos zone of transition or the messy middle that William Bridges talks about. That's still the phase we're in. We're still in the messy middle, even when somebody is kind of quote unquote stable during their transition. So needing maybe help to see that, to understand that, to navigate it, it comes even after some of the safety has been restored.
And Lisa, before we started recording, you were talking about your own transition now to Budapest and how
Mm,
there's still, maybe a sense of loss or just things that, that you are thinking about and love to process. And I think it helps to recognize that if people still need to talk about things a year, 2 years on, to give people space to do that and to have that grief. And I think it's going to help them feel, I mean, obviously more seen, but also able to be more present wherever they do end up too. So I think it really is helpful to recognize it's really not a quick process, and that's okay.
No, I'm more than almost 3 years into like the start of this transition personally, where I kind of had to leave Turkey and then moved to Hungary. And I've done a lot of processing. Thank God it's feel like I'm past the chaos stage of my transition, and some things are very stable and normal, and that's good. But then I'm still realizing some of the implications of how my life has changed from from what it was before to what it is now, and how much energy I have to muster to kind of restore the things that I want to and were just kind of in place before, and the implications of what now for me. There's just lots of things that it does take plenty of time. It's more than just the first reaction of leaving Antalya was, I love this place. I still want to be here. I love being by the sea. I miss the sea. Like these little things that pop up from time to time that still impact me. But my life changed significantly in making a change, even though my day to day looks quite similar as it did in Turkey. So yeah, having the space to do that and having somebody organizationally who will check in and ask you that and really understand that. That's educating yourself. If you're a care provider or a ministry leader, educating yourself about those things, if you're not already educated, gets to be really important too.
I think that ongoing impact is just it takes a long time and there's the higher level of uncertainty because a lot of people then sit, do we go back? Do we not go back? Do we look for somewhere new? What do we do with our kids' school? Do we homeschool? Do we put them in a school? What are we leaving? That whole uncertainty around a lot of sudden departures is just exhausting. And I think organizations will too move quickly, and I say quickly, it still might be 3, 6 months, a year, move through that of, okay, now it's time to look for the next thing, whereas that ongoing cost is still there. And I think for organizations to really fiscally plan for these kinds of things, you need to be prepared for if your staff who you've put in a place need to leave, I hope organizations are ready to help financially with the cost of care in a moment, both getting out and getting seen or treated, and also that kind of ongoing of, oh, it might take months, years to kind of begin to reestablish a new sense of identity and calling and location. It's just, I think sometimes organizations can lose track of that ongoing impact because they see somebody, they're in a new place, and they're looking for new roles maybe, and there's just so much loss that's happened.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's like transition is to us broadly, it's
Mm.
so, we all experience it. We experience it all the time. It becomes so normal to us that we just, like living in a country where kind of danger is increasing and growing, you get used to it over time. And so you don't necessarily recognize the impact on you. It takes just the practical, somebody having kind of a step back, zoomed out view of recognizing, even if you think you're handling it fine, there's still a lot of impact here. Grief
Right.
and loss is absolutely a part of the life we live. It's a part of everybody's life, but even more so the cross-cultural worker.
Mm.
And so understanding that needs to be a part of organizational culture and responding to that well. Yeah, it's a mandate, I think, for organizations who want to do it well.
I want to just briefly touch on some of the ripple effects, say if an individual or a family has to leave suddenly for like medical reasons or other reasons of care, how that can affect teammates and even local colleagues too. That can be pretty traumatic for the people who are still there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, I don't know, probably more common that somebody has to leave than just everybody has to leave all at once. for whatever reasons. And it's not always so sudden, but I think a lot of times it can be. And the kind of feeling of being left behind is a big deal. Even if you support and understand teammates or family's decision to go, you're still kind of left, as a teammate, hypothetically, holding the bag, so to speak, of an increased workload or a loss of connection and community that you really depended on, or just a sense of, I knew what to expect being here. And now the kind of rug was pulled out from under me in the sense that these people just left suddenly that I've come to depend on, even if it's just to do these practical things. There's so much knock-on effect for people that are left behind. And then when it comes to maybe ministry partners or people who are being ministered to in significant ways, to have the sense of being left is also hard. And it's hard to know for those people how to support or who can be responsible, because I don't think that every organization or the people that are leaving can take all the responsibility to say, we just had a family evacuation because of a family member's mental health crisis or a health crisis, and now we need to care for ourselves and the people left behind. That's not practical or useful necessarily. But if there is some team left behind, certainly the organization needs to respond to them as well. And if there's some sense of the team also being able to care for in some way the ministry partners or people that were left behind as well, that's helpful. I know that there's also this bit of guilt that the people that are leaving in that sort of situation, or because, say it's war unrest and they're evacuated, but the local people who are their friends and ministry partners and they have deep connected relationships to are not able to leave. There's also a lot of moral injury or just a lot of guilt that's left there. And, there's no easy answer to that. You can't fix or change that situation necessarily, but it deserves to be something that people are aware of and know they need to kind of work through and process.
I think as we wrap up, if you had any input on just some resources that would help individuals or organizations, and if you wanted to take a few minutes and just tell us a little more about the Olive Tree and how people can access services there and what you provide, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. I mean, resource wise, I did some scouring, and there are definitely some resources out there for um, kind of evacuees or organizations helping people evacuate in humanitarian spaces. And then there's care for global workers in kind of certain areas. But the Venn diagram of global workers who are being evacuated, there's not a lot of resources there. There's certainly not written or published ones. So hats off to you for at least creating one here with this podcast. But it's an area that needs more resources. So I don't have a lot of great ones to suggest there, but I think some of the things that apply are things about grief and loss and transition, and I can list some helpful books and resources around those sorts of things that we can put in notes or something. For Olive Tree, we are at olivetreecounseling.org. The easiest way to kind of connect through us. We've got contact forms and information on the website. Easy to kind of see what kind of services we offer. Usually Olive Tree offers counseling in 2-week intensives, which is a model that a lot of other organizations like us employ, but not everybody. So it's good to know if that's a good fit for you. You can kind of explore that on our site. But we're available for counseling, for debriefing, certainly for crisis care and these sorts of circumstances. Turns out we understand what it's like to be evacuated or have a sudden departure. So if that's you, you'll find some understanding counselors ready to sit with you about that. And of course, a lot of other things as well.
I also think for leaders, be sure to reach out and get somebody for some consultation. If there's not great resources out there, you're trying to develop better
Yeah,
policy around how to guide somebody well and shepherd a group through or an individual through a sudden departure. Like reach out and get some
yeah,
consultation. There's some great people
absolutely.
who are out in our networks.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and actually that reminds me. So probably last summer, we did a webinar series about transitions. We felt like it was something that we were ready to talk about at that stage and kind of had some good insight into. And we did, I mean, some of them were about planned departures or planned transitions, but we did a segment on unplanned transitions along these lines, the organizational aspect of care, personal aspect of care. So you might find some interesting things there too if this is something you're interested in learning about or you're going through.
And you guys do a great newsletter too, email letter that has really good articles and videos. How would people sign up for that?
Yeah, thanks. We too. So on our website is the easiest way to do that. It's, I believe, on the bottom of the very first page, you can find a place to sign up for the newsletter, or you can always email us. So info@olivetreecounseling.org is an easy way to reach us, and somebody will get you that newsletter.
I
Glad to
enjoy
hear
it.
it. Thanks.
Yeah, we'll stick it in
I'm
the.
proud of it, really.
Yes, you should
I
be.
have very little to do with it
Oh.
in the actual reality, except a little bit. But yeah, we've got a great thing going there, I think.
I see your name on the occasional article.
Yes, that's true. I just finished one that I'd spent about 2 years writing. About
Wow.
sleep. It's not because it took me 2 years, it's because it took me 2 years.
Yeah, know how that goes.
Hmm.
Well, Lisa, thanks so much for being on here and for what you do for our global workers at the Olive Tree.
Yeah, it's really pleasure to have colleagues like you guys doing what you're doing too, and knowing that we'll meet up around the world from time to time to do some similar things.
Good. It was good talking with you.
Thanks.
Yeah, great day.
What were you gonna say, Brandy?
I forgot. Oh, okay. So okay, I'm not gonna get us off track too much, but tell me about your garden. We're not gonna like compare, but I will. But last Wednesday, the heat index here was 118.
Woohoo! In your nice air-conditioned house powered by solar panels?
Well, true. Yes.